Hello and welcome to our Charlesbridge author Q&A. My name is Yolanda Scott. I am the publisher here at Charlesbridge, and I've been working at Charlesbridge in the editorial department since, too many years to count. It's actually been over 30, so I'm really pleased to be here today with two of my favorite authors. And I'm going to just turn it over to Mitali and Tina to give a short bio. Tina, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Tina Athaide. I am the author of Wings to Soar, which is a book written in verse about displacement, identity, fun, all those different types of things. I've been an educator for 30 some years. I live here just outside San Diego, and I've written another middle grade novel and some picture books, and I'm absolutely thrilled about this title with Charlesbridge, and I'm thrilled to bits to be here with Mitali.
Wonderful. Over to you, Mitali.
Well, I'm so happy to be here too. I'm very happy to be back with Charlesbridge with my next book, The Golden Necklace, which is a mystery set in the Darjeeling tea estates in my home state, my birthplace of West Bengal, India. It's a mystery about a girl who longs to exonerate her brother. She feels he's going to be falsely accused for the theft of some gold that's missing in her village, and she's going to find the one who took the gold so that her brother's name can be cleared.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Both of the books feature really smart, brave young girls. We've got Sona in The Golden Necklace, and we've got Viva in Wings to Soar. Both of them are in very unique cross-cultural settings that are so vividly written by both of you and are coming of age. So I think there's a lot that we have in common there in both of their books. There's a lot in both stories about how words and language can bridge borders, connect generations, connect hearts. I think that at a time in the world when empathy and cultural understanding are more needed than ever, we are really here to talk about how stories can shape how children see the world and how authors can really play such an important role in that journey. Both of you are writers, both of you are educators. You bring unique perspectives on how children's literature can be both a window and a mirror, and how kids can see themselves and also experience differences in a global setting and also in multicultural settings as well. I want to dig into who are Sona and who are Viva. They come from very different cultural and geopolitical experiences, but they are both so relatable. So I would love it if each of you could just briefly introduce your main character to us. Let's start with Mitali this time. Tell us about Sona.
Sona is a wonderfully smart young woman who is the daughter of a Nepali tea plucker. Very close family, and they live on the plantation housing, which is quite run down and not taken care of. And as a Nepali girl, she is a minority in that area. Most of the people there are Bengali speakers like myself. The fact that she's really smart is her family's hopes are pinned on her to break out of this constant cycle of just plucking tea. And so she's gotten a scholarship offer to a school, but she has to pass the English exam. So now she's cramming English to try to pass the exam at the start of the book, and she's desperately trying to keep that scholarship to be able to go to this really good quality international school that will be her ticket out of tea plucking.
Fantastic. There's a lot of threads going on with that character. I love it. Tina, how about Viva?
Viva. So Viva is actually Portuguese for full of life, living life. And her cultural background, she is Indian, but she is Goan, which is my background as well. Goa was a Portuguese colony, hence her name. And so my Viva, she is curious, she's determined, sometimes she's a little stubborn, and she feels deeply connected to family and roots. At this point, she's navigating huge changes in her life, both personal and cultural, because she has been expelled from her birth country, which is Uganda, and the book opens with her in a resettlement camp on the outskirts of London. She's learning how to hold on to the things that matter while still opening up to things that are new. She is the kind of character who asks hard questions, makes lots of bold mistakes, but she keeps going even when sometimes the path is uncertain. She navigates that with spirit, with music, channeling in her inner Diana Ross supremeness. And so she's fun. She was fun to write and fun to live.
I love the Diana Ross connection. Is that music that speaks to you personally as well? Like, what's your connection to the Supremes?
It does. During that time growing up, that was the music that was there. And it was incredible listening to some of those songs and the words. Sometimes that would be playing while I was writing. And I thought, music for so many kids it can translate them, it can transfer them, it can bring calmness, all those different things. It can be energetic. And so I thought, what a fun way to bring that into her personality. But it's also a great way for connections, because what's unique about this story is the resettlement camp in England was actually a military base that was being used by the United States. So she gets to meet up and connect to US military Air Force, and that's through music.
Wings to Soar takes place in 1972, and Golden Necklace is contemporary. How did you approach writing these stories at these times in these specific places?
Yes, but first I want to say that it was pretty amazing to read Tina's book, because I felt, it's one of those times when you read the book and you know that you and the author would really be good friends. And I love Viva so much. I was cheering for her from the start. She's such a sympathetic character. I set the book in contemporary Nepal because I love politics. I studied it in college, and I'm very interested in international settings where there are minority language groups. And I always think about the hands that pick the tea because I love tea. Just all around the world, that seems to be the case. There are these majority cultures that we think of, like people will say, oh, you're Indian. And then I'm like, no, I'm Bengali. But then even more specific, as Tina knows, we have these subcultures and they clash. There's clashes between them. So that's one of the reasons I said it there now. Another one is because the idea of a girl's education is so crucial to me, and especially in South Asia, as you know, I don't know if you know this, Tina, I was the third girl born in Calcutta. Everybody cried when I was born. They're like, another girl. So I think the idea of girls and education, the power of education in that area, and economic power, is always a personal thing for me, very personal. So I wrote for that. And Shona is the name of, my sister's name is Shonali, so Shonali Rupali Mitali. So I picked Shona, her name means gold, and she's on the hunt for a golden necklace. And our father would always tell us how a daughter was as good as a son. I think I put that in Rickshaw Girl, that very line. Shona's father tells her that a daughter is as precious as gold. So I think that idea of a parent championing your gender, even if it's rejected by the wider culture, is something that's very personal to me. So all of those things made me want to write about it right now and set in right now.
Mine was actually guided by the political event at that time. So it's not as though I could have picked a different year. And for me, it was very personal because I was living there at that time. I knew family, friends that went through a lot of this. And so there was no question for me with regards to setting it at that point. I absolutely loved doing some of the deeper research into this because I was able to bring in a lot of the political components that were happening, but in a way that it showed how Viva was caught between worlds, so that kids reading it could relate to some of that, whether they're moving from one school to another school or another state, or just moving homes, just that feeling of trying to figure out those two worlds and navigating that piece. And so the research part was so fascinating because I lived there as a child during that time. So to find historical documents and research what was going on and thread those in just a little bit, like you were saying, Mitali, that political component, studying those, it's always amazing. It is. And now we have such access to personal reflections on political events and times that brings such a humanity to what was going on. So for me, that was amazing too.
Mitali, with Golden Necklace, I know the idea of water scarcity is a really big theme in the book. I wonder if you could speak, Mitali, to kind of what are some of the challenges that your characters are facing in Darjeeling at that time?
it's funny because when you're writing fiction, the nonfiction piece is it's immovable. You can't really play around with it too much. So it's almost like a secondary character, but you have to know it really well. But it can't morph the way that a fictional secondary character. There's certain constraints. I find that discipline really helpful as a writer because when you have that constraint, it's almost like the fiction has to run the course that's more narrow, and so you have to be very disciplined with your fiction. You're you have to know it so well. You have to know the course so well that as your as your characters are navigating it, they have to stay within those bounds, which gives you a certain discipline, but it's really hard. Sometimes I wish I didn't know so much about tea. Then I can make something up. I wish I wish I didn't know so much, and then sometimes you don't know enough, and then you fear that you made a mistake and your character. So there's always that tension between the research being solid as a rock, but also knowing it can be flawed because we're flawed. And there's that
Mhm.
fear of that. And then there's also the challenge, the creative challenge, which I really like in the long run, of it providing the constraints to structure your fiction through those constraints. So it's quite a bit, but I find, I mean, you do the best you can.
For me, what is really important is how accessible the books are to all readers. Both of these books, you can know nothing about Darjeeling tea pluckers, and you can know nothing about 1972's Ugandan refugees or the circumstances that led them to get expelled, and still have a wonderful read, a book that really you connect with both of these characters.
So I say, I see cultural specificity as a bridge in all my books. And I would say the same when in all the books you write, Mitali, it's a bridge and not a barrier. And I think the reason that happens, and I saw this in reading your book as well, is it's key on how we render the world that we're writing in. And we bring in cultural components, but also immersing them in that world, whether it's the tea, the food, the smells, sounds, the rhythms of where they are. And that makes it real for our reader. And I think both of us don't over explain. And I think that helps that we're educators because that instinct is to trust our reader to pick up meaning through context. And we ground them enough in the story that it's not a barrier to the cultural piece. The doors are wide open and it welcomes them into our world that we have. And this way, our readers can see both what's familiar and they see what's new. And then they're discovering things along the way as they're connecting to this environment we've created, this world we've created, and these characters. And I see that in all of your books, Mitali, and especially in this one that's coming out. And I see that similarity with what I do as well. And I think that's why it opens the door to the reader connecting with Viva or with Sonia and what they're going through.
There's I think, a huge responsibility in writing and publishing children's literature that's very different from writing for adults, certainly. And I'm wondering, since both of you are educators, do you have any best practices for selecting and teaching and discussing diverse books in the classroom, in the library?
Yes, so we'll let the master educator go second, but I have taught a bit, and one of my repeated themes that I love to share with educators, especially, is this idea of not being scared of a story if a child is a multi-storied reader. By that I mean our
Mm-hmm.
goal is to empower the child reader to be in charge of all of the stories so that one single story won't tell that child how to feel about their own identities or the identities of others. And so when a child like myself, I grew up, reading, I was a feral wild reader. Nobody was moderating my story input. I just read so many stories that I began to understand that they moderated each other and that I was in charge of what I was going to let define me. By the time I was in middle school, I was already very much in charge of my own story because of all the stories I read. And that's the power of stories if they're not a single story. So I guess my one tip to educators, to parents, and of course, not every child is going to get to be multi storied, which is why there is so much fear over that single story. Like, the one story someone gets to read about a Kampala refugee of Indian descent is going to be this book, then we want it to be sure it's right, right? But so the more stories, the better. And it's one of the things I love about Charlesbridge is your commitment to many, many stories about, and the nuances told by many, many storytellers around cultures. And I think that's the most that we're getting to that. We're moving toward that as a community of publishing. But the more stories, the better. And the more stories for every child, the better.
I would agree with you. I love that term that you use, multi-storied. It's so important to create connection points. So before reading, you invite children to share their own aspects and things from their own life, because once they start reading, if they have that in their headspace, they start looking at the similarities and differences as they're reading, and there's your bridge, which is fantastic. And then encouraging multiple responses, and this is always important for me, allowing our readers, beyond just reading the book, if they're in the classroom, they have a multitude of gifts, and not all those gifts may be in the form of writing. And so you let them respond through art, through journaling, through discussing. I had one teacher, she did mini video clips where they took different scenes, the kids picked different scenes from the book, and they filmed and reenacted 1 minute shorts or 2 minute shorts. And the kids wrote their own dialogue, and then they filmed it, and then she sent it to me. Oh my gosh, it was the best thing ever. But it taps into their interpretation. And so let the kids have fun with what the literature is that they're reading.
When you're empowering the child reader, you've got to leave them room to make their own connections.
Yes.
So I think, like I get surprising letters like you do, Tina, I'm sure, from kids that have made connections and have seen themselves reflected in my story, apart from, they're not all just, Bengali girls. They are boys who are from the farm in the Midwest or something who say, "Dear Mrs. Perkins, I really liked how brave Naima was," and they're connecting with that courage, and that's up to them to find that connection, because as Yo said, books are windows and mirrors, but we never know where someone's going to see themselves reflected and where they're going to have a window open into another life. And so when you introduce a book, I would recommend being a little bit more creative in the way you introduce a book. So instead of saying, "This is a book about 1972 refugee camping," you could say, "This is a book about a girl whose mom is really sad, and her sister is really sad, and she's trying her best to help them not be so sad." I don't know if any of you have ever had a parent who gets low and sad. So you make those connections, the surprising connections, and then instead of the more obvious, it's Asian American History Month, so let's, those kinds of more, I would say, be creative as parents and educators to help kids be surprised about some of the things they may find in these stories that are both windows and mirrors.
It's those universal themes that cross over for kids and people as a whole. I agree with you.
I'm hearing you both say how important it is to lean into inclusivity and inviting everyone into stories, as opposed to separating groups of people based on identities and looking at it as an us or them sort of a world. It is more of a we situation. Yeah, that's wonderful. Good. I'm curious, Mitali, you mentioned hearing from readers and how that can be surprising sometimes. Is there a moment that you can remember, and we'll start with you, Tina, where a child's reaction to your work either surprised you or really moved you in a certain way? Do you have any specific memories to share?
I do. What I think for me with Wings to Soar, what was incredible is the generation of people that were expelled from Uganda. They went through a lot, and that's not a period of time that they talk about. I was doing a book talk in England, and one of the children said, "You know what, this story is like what happened to my grandparents." And so now the beautiful thing is something that they never spoke about. we have multi-generational conversations. And she was so thrilled to know this was a book that was related to her grandparents. And she felt, wow, now my class is reading something, like you were saying, Mitali, related to me. And the other kids in the class, there were some that were refugees, maybe from other countries. And so it opened up a huge connection, and a huge connection and a huge bridge. And I think for me, that was amazing to know that the heart and hurt of people that went through what they did has healed enough over time that this story can now be a bridge for them to share with their grandchildren and family. And that was, I think, for me, was incredible.
I've written Rickshaw Girl, Tiger Boy, Bamboo People are my three sort of similar genre as The Golden Necklace, which is coming out. And I think I get, it's so amazing when Bamboo People, which is set in Burma, about Karenni refugees and forced conscription of child soldiers in the Burmese army, which is continuing to this day. It's amazing when I get a note from a Karenni refugee that says, you know, it's so wonderful to see myself in the story. I love those notes. But then you get these beautiful responses from kids all over the world who want to help. Their hearts are stirred with compassion, right? They read and they write you and they say, I want to help. What can I? And it's in their own handwriting, and then maybe a second or third, all the way up through Bamboo People goes up to 8th grade. You'll get these lovely notes, and for me, it's so encouraging because it's what literature did for me. Like, it widens your heart. It gives you that sense of wanting true north, justice. My life's mission, right? I studied development, and I had that goal, Tina. I don't know about you. Before I leave this earth, there will not be one hungry child. But then I just chose this vocation of children's books, which felt so removed from actually doing the work of eradicating poverty or fighting for justice. But I just wrote a book about this called Just Making. It's nonfiction for grown-ups, about how stories actually shape the heart, right? For life. We talked about this earlier. And so when you're generating this compassionate response or a desire for justice, and you're stoking the embers of that in the child's heart, and they get fired up by that desire to see justice roll down or compassion. They want to do something that's not about themselves but helping people with less power. Well, then I've done my job. My work here is done. You know, I just have such a satisfaction.
You're really validating my career choice today, both of you. So thank you. I've always said working in books is the best business ever, and the legacy that you leave with your writing that passes down for generations to come is really incredible. For the last question, I just want to ask you, what's next for you? What projects are you working on? What's next?
I'm excited. I have books coming out with Charlesbridge, and then my daughter, she is graduating from university, and she's done illustration and animation. We thought it would be fun to take my fantasy book, and I have written script for some of the chapters, and she is designing those chapters as graphic novels, because part of my passion is struggling readers, reluctant readers, kids that don't read. That's who I have worked with for years. So I'm playing around with that with her right now.
Terrific. Yeah, I think that's such a great way to engage readers, as I'm a big fan of the hybrid novels. Mitali, what about you?
Well, I am currently under deadline to work on this memoir that I'm writing, which is really even more constrained, right? Because you have to go, be historically correct in the time that you grew up, but also try to be accurate with what happened. It's touchy because some of the issues that we South Asian girls face growing up can't be handled very reverentially because they're difficult, like domestic violence and things like that. And so I'm really having a hard time writing it. I've spent I think I keep going between writing and therapy and writing. I don't know. It's just going so deep, and it's kind of painful, but I want to write it with all my heart. In fact, your book, Tina, was a kind of a master class in how I'm balancing verse and story and humor, because I always like to try to write funny when I write those kinds of books. So that is happening, and it's exertion. But I'm waiting for the next story to tap me on the shoulder in the genre of Tiger Boy set in India about poaching and conservation and stewardship of the land. Rickshaw Girl about microcredit set in Bangladesh. We have Bamboo People set in Burma, like refugees, child soldiers. Now we have a tea plucker and the water shortage in Darjeeling. So I would love to go revisit something else in South Asia and see if a character taps on my shoulder and says, "Hey." When I used to travel there, I'm like, they used to say sister now, and then they started saying auntie. Now they say grandmother.
Oh no.
Sorry. So I'm waiting for a character to come and say, Nani, write the story, and I will do it. I will try to be faithful, and it'll delve into some of the same issues I've always loved too. These interactions of the marginalized, and I'm waiting. I'm open-hearted and open-handed. So if a little character comes along, and since I don't have my own grandchildren yet, why not? I'm waiting for some fictional character to come along and say, grandmother, tell our story, and I'll say, oh, with all my heart, but with so much courage, I'll do the best I can.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here, for taking the time out of your busy lives and your writing lives to talk about these two amazing books, Wings to Soar and The Golden Necklace. And we're so thrilled to have you on the Charlesbridge list, and really, really appreciate all you do for readers everywhere around the world, opening hearts and minds one book at a time. Thank you.